So I really want to talk about a video game that I have been excited for ever since the trailer came out. I'm talking about Hollow Knight Final Fantasy 16. I recently finished the game and I have a lot, and I mean a lot to say about the game. I am at a loss because I truly thought this game was, at worst, gonna be a fine game. During the first half of my playthrough, I thought I was playing something special, even taking notes on various things to keep up with the story and understand every character's motivations better. But my notes spiraled out of control to the point of it being a place for me to scream into the void because I was confused and lost about a whole variety of different things. Now I'm going to make it everyone else's problem because here is my review on Final Fantasy 16. The beginning portion of this video is going to start spoiler free, so if you're scared of spoilers, you can stay in this section, I guess, if you even care at all. I'll explicitly say when I'm diving into the point of no return. It also should go without saying that you should formulate your own opinion on this game, so if you enjoyed this game and Final Fantasy 16 is your GOAT, then I am happy for you. Without further ado, if I had to sum up my thoughts in one sentence, it would probably go like Clive funneled any fantasy of enjoyment I had for this game. If it's not immediately clear in the beginning of this video, I did not like this game. That's not to say I didn't have fun, because I ended up doing all the side quests, completed the hunt board, and tried my very best to get every memory on Clive's table. But for some reason I'm missing two, which I have no idea how to get. But I feel like I enjoyed this game for all the wrong reasons. I will start talking about the things that I did enjoy, and then I'll get into my critique of the game. Visually, the game looks amazing. I think Creative Business Unit 3 knocked it out of the park on visuals. Cutscenes look phenomenal, and the cut between cutscene and gameplay was for the most part pretty seamless. I thought that was really nice. Icon fights also looked really cool, and I was impressed with how visually stunning the fights were. The music, unsurprisingly, was good. There was one song from one of the Icon fights that rhymes with Frightened that really stood out to me. All the other Icon fights had good music. Not a whole lot else to say other than the music was great. Character designs were top notch, and whoever worked on detailing everyone's outfits earned so much praise from my end. So many outfits looked incredible, and I had a hard time deciding who had the best fit. I think for me it's between Benedicta, Jill, and Dion, but they all look good. And this pretty much ends all the positive things I have to say about Final Fantasy 16. I really wanted to put combat here. It's definitely not bad. I just think the combat's a bit disappointing, and it does not progress well into the end of the game. So let's dive into that conversation. Other than the story, the thing that drew me most to Final Fantasy 16 was the combat. When I heard that the combat director for Devil May Cry 5 was on this project, you could say that my motivation was rising. The best way I can describe the combat in this game is a mix between Devil May Cry 5, Kingdom Hearts, and a little splash of Nier in there. Which makes sense considering they took people who have worked on those respective games. At the beginning of Final Fantasy 16, you have two talent trees to work with. One that focuses on Clive's sword fighting and magic, so being able to imbue your weapon with fire or having the ability to stomp on an enemy to extend your combo, sick. The second tree is all about the first icon that you start out with, Phoenix. There are only 4 abilities for every icon, but you can only equip 2 per icon. For the beginning portion of the game, I just stuck with the default launch ability and AoE sweep attack for Phoenix. As you progress, you gather more icon abilities and combos become a lot more interesting. Eventually you can master abilities by dumping points into it, which allows you to use an icon ability on a completely different icon, which opens up a lot of interesting mixing and matching. I thought this was actually pretty cool and fun until I got towards the end, or even maybe the middle of the game, where I was like, I really wish I could use this ability, but I already have 6 abilities. I am going to compare a lot to Devil May Cry 5 because, well, it feels like Devil May Cry, but it lacks the depth that Devil May Cry has, which bothered me a lot because the combat director said Final Fantasy 16 was his magnum opus, which I highly disagree with, but let's talk about it. Let's take Nier, the first character you play as in Devil May Cry 5. As you progress through the game, you purchase skills unique to Nero. Similarly, like in Final Fantasy 16, Nero has skills that you can upgrade to get a stomp or lunge attack, very similar to Clive's tree that I was talking about. Now where Devil May Cry deviates is how it goes about its abilities. When you purchase Nero's abilities, you can use all of them, provided that you can do the input combo of course, which is a completely different story. For example, Nero has 2 ability unlocks for his sword. You can buy Red Queen Combo B and Red Queen Combo C. Creative names, I know. For the former, the way you execute this combo is by pressing X, X, and mashing X. For the latter combo, the button press is different where you press X, X, pause, and then 4 more X presses. 2 very different abilities with 2 very different execution patterns. There are in total 4 Red Queen combos for Nero, and every combo can be used after unlocking them in the store. Let's go back to Final Fantasy XVI. Like I said previously, you can unlock 4 abilities in a tree, but can only equip 2. I equipped the 2 abilities Rising Flames and Scarlet Cyclone. The execution pattern for these 2 abilities goes as follows: R2 plus square for Rising Flames, and R2 plus triangle for Scarlet Cyclone. I want to make it clear that my problem does not lie with the execution pattern, although I think it would have been a huge improvement to the combat, but rather the fact that I don't have access to the 2 other abilities in the Phoenix tree even after unlocking them. If I wanted to use the 2 other abilities in that tree, I would need to equip it on a completely different icon, which feels pretty bad because that means I can't use any moves on that specific icon. So then, what is the possible solution to this? My immediate thought is to copy exactly what Devil May Cry does and just have different button presses for different abilities. For example, if I wanted to do Rising Flames, the execution pattern could be R2 plus square. Cool. Next, if I wanted to cast Scarlet Cyclone, I would press R2 plus triangle. Neat. Now if I wanted to use the 3rd ability in the Phoenix tree, Heat Wave, the button press for that, R2 plus square plus triangle in quick succession. Lastly, I can finish my combo with the signature ability in the Phoenix tree, Flames of Rebirth, which could be an even longer combo like R2 plus square plus triangle plus square. I felt so sad not being able to use these big point signature combos because there was a lack of space per icon. I ultimately felt like a lot of skills were wasted, and towards the end of the game I had an abundance of skill points available because you can only spec into so many abilities before you are capped out. I also want to say that even though you are capped out at 6 abilities total, you can still make some pretty cool looking combos, provided of course that you are fighting a smaller enemy that can be launched. I admit that combat would have gotten pretty confusing with these combination button presses for newer players, but maybe these combo inputs could have been changed with a trinket system, or the harder difficulty that Final Fantasy XVI has to offer. Which brings me to my next point, difficulty. I am completely baffled at the fact that I was not able to have a difficulty option when first starting the game. I know that you can change the difficulty with the trinkets that they give you at the start of the game to make it easier, but why was there no option to make it more difficult? I do not understand why I had to complete the story in order to unlock the harder, more challenging version of the game. I personally did not think the game was all that difficult, and maybe I wouldn't have played on the harder difficulty to begin with, but from what I gather it seems like the combat shines a little brighter on the harder difficulty. I know the biggest argument against this is, well, the enemies from later on in the game show up much earlier, and story-wise, it would not make much sense. And my counterpoint to that is, make more unique enemies. It felt like enemy variety in this game was lacking a ton, and honestly, it was pretty disappointing seeing the same ninja-style character rehashed 4 different times. I will not expand on this point further because if you played or watched the game, I feel like you would understand what I mean. It's a Final Fantasy game. There's a whole long directory of different enemies that they could have included. Yes, it would have been more work, I know, but enemy variety is severely lacking. Maybe the reason why hard mode is unlocked after completing the game is to add replayability to Final Fantasy XVI. Although I personally don't see a reason to go through the game again. I understand this is a me problem because I quite frankly don't replay games very often, and I don't really hunt for high scores. Although if you do, that's great. But I fail to understand why hard mode can't be an option in the beginning of the game, because if you do like replaying games, and you do like hunting high scores on the hardest difficulty possible, you will probably do it anyway. The only time I will replay a game is when there is a completely different way to play. For example, Fallout New Vegas, which has so many different ways you can build a character. There is also a variety of weapons with a bunch of different effects, and a bunch of different dialogue options that open up to you when you go down a certain build path. Basically, what I'm saying here is that Final Fantasy XVI lacks these RPG elements that helps replayability. Okay, so originally I know that Yoshi P did not want to label this game as a JRPG and just a normal action RPG. Cool, I get that. But my issue lies with, where are the RPG elements to begin with? With an RPG, progression is the first thing I think of. Getting a new, brighter, shinier, stronger sword for completing a quest should be exciting and rewarding. In Final Fantasy XVI, I did not feel upgrading my gear was all that necessary. Yes, I still did it because, well, why wouldn't you? But I did not feel any sense of power increase when I did change to a new sword. I mean, at least the sword changes its appearance, which I think is neat, I like that. But there were times when I opened up the blacksmith menu, saw that my purple rarity sword was getting outclassed by a green rarity sword, and said, nah, I'm good. The biggest and most puzzling decision I thought was the fact that none of the swords had any status effects on them, which to me is a Final Fantasy staple. There was no sword that had a sleep, a paralysis, a berserk, whatever. Nothing. Okay, fine, no status effects. I can live with that. I'm going to drop a super minor spoiler, so if you don't want to get spoiled on this small thing, then open up a new tab, listen to Bury the Light on full blast for like 15 seconds. Is it playing? Can you hear me? No? Okay. When you defeat an icon, usually right afterwards, you would get a sword that matches up with said icon. For example, when you defeat Garuda, you get the option to craft a sword that has the motif of Garuda. So why, when I equip this Garuda-themed sword, do I not get any bonuses when using the Garuda icon? Okay, I think our spoiler-free friends should be back, so let's continue. Outside of upgrading your sword, you can upgrade bracelets and a sash, which honestly adds little other than upgrading health and defense by a max of like 10 points. Is it progression? Yes. Does it feel cool? Not really. You can craft a variety of swords, bracelets, and sashes, but to be honest, a lot of the crafting materials that you gather are pretty useless and a vast majority will not be used. Crafting also feels like an afterthought because there's little incentive to look at all the other items when you just find the one with the highest stat increase. To round out gameplay, I really want to vent about Torgal. Yo, what's up? I realized something about Torgal while I was editing. I realized that there are precision moves for Torgal, and they seem to be a whole lot more useful than his normal moves. I unfortunately never learned about this until after beating the game, but I'm willing to concede that Torgal isn't as useless as I thought he was, so the rest of these points, take them as you will. Because I feel like he was more or less useless in combat. I really wanted to get him involved in combos, and when I did, it felt great. But when you go up against enemies that are of medium size, Torgal, I think, just ceases to exist. He has 3 abilities: Sick, Heal, and Ravage. Sick sends Torgal to attack the enemy. Heal is pretty self-explanatory, but I'll come back to it. And Ravage is Torgal's launch attack. The only ability that I used a lot was Ravage because I thought Ravage into Phoenix Shift, a blink to enemy ability, was a fun combo starter. Unfortunately, as I said, if the enemy has a will gauge, I stopped using Torgal. I found that there was no need to unless the enemy was close to 50%, which would lead to a half stagger. I'm pretty sure Torgal's damage did scale along with Clive, but from what I noticed, the damage was still pretty low. Coming back to Torgal's heal, this ability I found to be completely useless. Maybe I was using it wrong, but I could not for the life of me see any noticeable improvement to my health when I used it. I know that there is a gray health system, and I figured, oh, I can only heal up to where the gray health is. If it is a regen, which I'm almost 99% sure it is, it just did not kick in fast enough for me to notice. Torgal is an absolute mystery to me lore-wise and gameplay-wise, and this is going to be the point of no return, because he acts as a perfect segue into spoiler territory. If you do want to experience this game for yourself, please do. Hopefully you have a more positive experience than I did. Here is my spoiler-free stance on this game. I am going to word this as carefully as possible. If you want a Final Fantasy experience, then you will probably enjoy this game. I think if you are slightly on the fence about combat or if money is an issue, I would heavily suggest watching the cutscenes on YouTube because I don't think you're missing out too much on combat and icon fights. Now, of course, playing the game is a better holistic experience, but I don't think the $70 price tag justifies the game, let alone buying a PS5 for the game, which I did. If you want a good Final Fantasy story, honestly, just play Final Fantasy XIV because they tried really hard to copy what made 14 so good and slap it into a single-player experience. The game's story feels exactly like the new Star Wars trilogy, had potential but ultimately wasted trying to play on the hearts of what made Star Wars, or in this case, Final Fantasy, enjoyable. I genuinely think Creative Business Unit 3 put all their time into the visuals of this game and making the icon fights look as good as possible, but neglected everything else. A lot of their early side quests are awful and adds little to the story. Go here, talk to this guy, deliver these wine bottles, clear out this camp of enemies for me, etc. Only towards the end of the game do you start to get more meaningful side quests that add context to characters. I honestly would have preferred if the early side quests did not exist, as the time creating those side quests could have been seriously used for the main story. If Creative Business Unit 3 were serious about having an action game, then let it be an action game length. Do not add meaningless side quests unless there is real value to be added, or else I'm thinking, wow, they really wanted to extend the playtime of this game. I have completely avoided talking about the main narrative up until this point because there's no real way for me to talk about the story without spoiling it. But if you want the quick version, the story is a mess for a variety of reasons. Pacing, characters, and payoff all fell flat to me. There were only 2 characters I thought that had genuine motivations, and a lot of characters were sidelined for convenient plot reasons. This is all I had to say for my spoiler-free critique, review, rant, whatever. I will now be moving into spoiler territory. Thank you for watching if you're clicking out, and for the ones staying, I will now descend into madness. I'm also going to preemptively apologize because this part is more or less not a critique anymore, but going to be a very long rant. Before I lose my collective mind talking about the story and its characters, I have to continue the conversation about Torgal. At a little over halfway through the game, Hugo Kupka starts an invasion on Rosaria, the home of Mr. Clive Rossfield. During this story beat, it is revealed that Torgal has some sort of powers that awaken, but we don't exactly know why just yet. A little later on, we find that Torgal has awoken to the powers of Fenrir. Cool, I think this is actually pretty fun. However, I have a huge issue with Torgal's gameplay. Why are we not able to equip abilities to Torgal in the very least? Because he clearly has it. It even shows it under the ability menu screen. I also had a very hard time trying to figure out what made Torgal go Fenrir mode. I originally thought that limit breaking would put Torgal in Fenrir mode, but quickly learned that was not the case. From what I understand, it's random and he just turns into Fenrir whenever he feels like it. When I learned that I have no way of controlling Torgal's Fenrir state, I was devastated. I really wanted to utilize Torgal in a way that would be useful, but when I'm stuck with the same old Sick and Ravage, I was very disappointed. I just wish that I was able to switch these 3 abilities for something else. Now, with my disappointment with Torgal out of the way, I will now descend into madness trying to pick apart the story of Final Fantasy XVI. I honestly have no idea where to begin. If you are in this spoiler section of this video, I'm going to assume that you have some knowledge of the events that happen in 16. If not, I will try and add some context, but I really do not want to do a whole retelling of the events of all that happens in the game. I think the most obvious place to start is the prologue. Without a doubt, the prologue of this game, really well done. I think it sets up a lot of set pieces as well. Clive and his revenge warpath, the political intrigue between Dhalmekia and Waloed, the mysterious betrayal of Annabelle and House Rossfield. It was gripping, and honestly, I was so eagerly excited to see everyone's different reactions to the events of the prologue. Especially that very powerful scene of Ifrit mauling the ever-living life out of Phoenix. This part is important to my overall disappointment with the story. Tone. The prologue set the tone of the world to be very dark, depressing, and serious. People will die, bearers are slaves to non-bearers, and dominants are not to be underestimated because they quite literally embody the spirit of a god. If we were going to set the mood to be serious, then I expect the game to take the story seriously. But to me, it's pretty clear that the only character that they took somewhat seriously was Clive and maybe, just maybe Sid. I hope everyone is prepared because I will be going down the line of all the main players of the story. I will be starting with Benedicta. Her introduction in the prologue seemed really cool because she called out the leaders of Dhalmekia, pretty much stating that Waloed will not fight their battle against the Iron Kingdom when they haven't even put in the effort of sending their own dominant to battle. In her next major scene, she is shown to be ruthless, executing a person who relayed her valuable information even though they were loyal to Waloed. Cid and Clive eventually come to battle Benedicta, and she is shown to be a pretty capable fighter, besting Cid and even stopping Clive's sword with one hand. She also has scenes where she is trying to play both Kupka and Barnabas. Basically, Benedicta has been set up to be this incredibly strong femme fatale. I thought she had a lot of potential to be a really cool character, but for some odd reason, they just used Benedicta as a plot device to make Clive stronger and showcase that he has some weird ability to steal icon powers, not of his own free will, I guess. And once Benedicta no longer had the blessing of Garuda, she turned out to be incredibly helpless. Eventually, we see a little bit into her backstory after she loses her powers. Her childhood was rough. Essentially, she was a sex slave, and the person that helped her was Cid. Now, what makes me the most mad is that we originally see this cunning femme fatale, and then towards the end of the Benedicta arc, we see a woman who chases after Cid because that was the one person that helped her. It also gets more weird because it seems like she just doesn't think for herself at all and just accepts Barnabas to be the person to save the world, not questioning Barnabas, her position in Waloed, and why Cid originally left the kingdom. When Benedict is about to die, she for some reason has this aha moment where she's like, oh, maybe I should have listened to Cid. It felt so weird to me because Benedicta just didn't get it until the very end, and how she needed Cid in order to have any brain capacity to think. She literally went from what looked to be a capable character to a character that has no agency unless Cid or Barnabas was telling her what to do. An absolute waste of a character, I think. No redemption arc or anything, just her regretting not listening to wise old man Cid. To me, it felt a bit gross, now knowing Benedicta's traumatizing backstory has yet again no agency and no thought for themselves. Just absolutely no growth as a character. Better yet, the character even regresses, and then her body goes and gets mutilated. What? Okay, moving on. Let's redirect our attention to something a little more lighthearted. Let's talk about Hugo Kupka, because they turned what seemed to be a really cool character into yet again a one-dimensional pile of garbage. I think Hugo could have been so much better, but literally his only ambition was to be with Benedicta, and yet again, Benedicta is the stepping stool for another character. There is nothing else to this character other than him crying over Benedicta's death and wanting revenge on Cid. I have genuinely no idea why Hugo thought Cid was the one responsible for Benedicta's death. I don't recall a single indication of Hugo knowing about Cid, so it was really weird to me when Hugo received the box that contained Benedicta's head. He didn't even begin to think that it was the Iron Kingdom or Barnabas, which I find so confusing. It's also so painful, because I remember hearing multiple times that Hugo loved his traps and how he seemed like a pretty knowledgeable guy about strategy. But he actually has rocks for a brain, I guess, because he gets outmaneuvered by Annabella, Harbord, and Barnabas. Also, when he loses to Clive, he just baby rages, and I could not stop laughing at how uninspired this character is. Annabella. Surely the character that stole the show in the prologue will finally be a well-written character with good motivations and reasons, right? Wrong. I literally have no words for how awfully executed this character was. This character is honestly evil just to be evil. That is it. She is incredibly elitist, and she only cares about the icon being passed to a child that is of purebred. What fully drove me over the edge with her character is that she was threatening Dion, the dominant of Bahamut, and had no plan after fucking around and finding out. This character was supposed to be smart and scheming, yet she pretty much said, Dion, be a good little boy and listen to your stepbrother, the next in line for Sambrek. And honestly, I have no idea what she was expecting. Dion, let me reiterate, the dominant of Bahamut, was just going to let that slide. I have no idea what was happening here because even the Emperor was like, Dion, you must listen to what I say. I truly don't get why Dion was getting bullied here by a bunch of frauds, especially when we learned that the Dragoons only listened to Dion. What an absolute fucking mess this shit was. Annabella is such a frustrating character, but not for the correct reason of being a frustratingly good villain. Lastly, this character could have died off screen and I would not have cared, as she was so superficial and underdeveloped. It's not all bad because I did like one character, Dion. I thought Dion was great, and I was cheering for him the whole time. All he wanted was the good of his nation, but that was rudely interrupted by Annabella. I do have a couple issues with Dion though. First, why was he not immediately suspicious of Annabella when she randomly shows up after the fall of Rosaria? Second, how is it possible for Dion to control Bahamut after he lost his powers to Clive? I just don't know why this plot point is so inconsistent. And if we're going to just accept that he has the willpower to control Bahamut, what does that say about Benedicta? Okay, back to our regularly scheduled characters that should have been better but ultimately fumbled to be compelling. Barnabas. I will be 100% transparent here. I do not understand a single thing about this character. I fully admit this portion of the video is no longer a critique and more so of a rant, but I am genuinely at a loss when I think about Barnabas. I understand that he was a servant to Ultima and that he tried sacrificing the world to please Ultima so that maybe Ultima may include humans in the world reborn. But I literally only learned that by reading through the Act of Time lore. I, for the life of me, could not understand this character's dialogue. He was spewing so much nonsense, I literally caught myself tuning out completely. I also checked out during the scene with Barnabas and Ultima. It just felt really weird, and then he saw his mom, and I was confused, and I don't fully understand what's going on with his mom and stuff, but I assumed that he lost his mother to the Blight or something? I don't know. At this point, I can no longer think that Barnabas was cool and just another Muppet in the story. Ultima. I'm gonna be honest. I thought Ultima was gonna be so much cooler. This character was just boring. He talked with no urgency, no emotion, no vessel, no hose, no hair, honestly, just a worse version of an Ascian that has hopes to return the world to its former glory with his own kind. At least the Ascians in Final Fantasy XIV were human at some point in their lives, but lost a version of themselves along paths through eons of fighting to preserve their world. Ultima gave me nothing to care about him. His character gave us no attempt to make him even the slightest bit likable or have any sympathy for. He was just a villain to make Clive look better. Sid. Alright, I actually like Sid. I thought he was a cool character, and his voice actor did wonders for making him seem like a Giga Chad. With that being said, I really wish Sid turned out to be the villain of this game. I thought it was super suspicious when Sid had that big revelation about the Mother Crystals. Clive, the Mother Crystals are the ones to blame for this damn blight on this land. We should destroy every single one of them to save this world. And Clive was just like, yes sir, I will do just that. I will not question it whatsoever because you are the coolest guy around. I thought this was going to be a Bravely Default situation where the closest character to Clive was the villain all along. This would have been far more interesting to me because it's like, whoa, no way, I can't believe this guy who had been doing all these good deeds could be evil. This would have opened up the opportunity to dive deeper into Sid's backstory, which we didn't get too much of, other than doing some side quests that showed Otto, Gav, Charon, and Martha being introduced to Sid, and how wonderful of a guy he was. Joshua. I liked Joshua, but I think it's funny considering how much blood he was coughing up throughout the whole game that he was still able to make it to the end. I was starting to get very annoyed with the, you need rest, you need to take your medicine shtick, because of course, he was gonna be fine enough to make it to the end with Clive. Also, Joshua knew about Ultima, but only seeked out Clive when it was most convenient for the story, I guess. The whole Scooby-Doo just barely passing each other when they were in the same vicinity was just... why? Like, why did they have... I didn't... Jill. I want to know who was responsible for writing this character, because there is no universe where they ship out this character and say, all good, smiley face. I think the medicine girl in the game had far more interesting dialogue than whatever they gave to Jill. I am so very, and I mean very disappointed with how she was written and portrayed throughout this video game. I straight up forgot that Jill was even a dominant because they didn't allow Shiva to shine at all. Oh, she has to use her ice powers? Oh no, she might actually petrify on the spot because the spell is just too powerful for her frail body. What? Literally, if I am seeing Joshua hack up blood every 4 seconds looking like the Joker and can prime no problem, then what the fuck is up with Jill that does not allow her to even use an ice ability without her being stun locked afterwards? Oh, but it does not end there. Every single scene that includes Shiva has her getting jobbed 2 seconds later. Fighting with Titan? Fucking obliterated. Fighting against this small flame monster thing? Too powerful. Clive, you need to handle this semi-prime. I will be a good little Shiva and create an arena around you so you can fight. I must use 1000% concentration to freeze the lava around the arena, or else I will explode because this icon is too powerful for me. Fighting against Odin? Don't know how to dodge. It is so fucking embarrassing seeing this character get narratively murdered in front of my eyes. Oh, and the scene following Clive's defeat against Odin, for some reason all the characters have no sense of urgency at all. There is no care in the world for Jill being present. Everyone is too worried about good, outstanding citizen Clive to even remotely think about the other character that got lost in the battle. What was their name again? I don't know, man. I guess they're not important enough. But it's okay. Clive said that she will be fine, so there's no reason to worry. I swear, this made me so upset because Clive earlier in the game was losing his mind seeing Joshua fly in the sky against Bahamut. Granted, he sees Joshua for the first time in however many years, but I at least expected Clive to act a little bit more in panic when Jill was not present with them, especially when they're supposed to be the love interest of one another. It is also incredibly embarrassing seeing Jill get captured not once, not twice, but 3 different times in the game. And every single time, she needed to be saved by her knight in shining armor, Mr. Clive Goody Two Boots. It's okay though, because the writers at least had the decency to show Jill kill the Ironblood priest or whatever, but I'm pretty sure a strong gust of wind could have toppled that man over. I really wanted to like this character, but they did everything possible to write this character into a corner to be Clive's Muppet. She had no motivation other than to follow the same goal that Clive had, which was to fight for a world where everyone could be free and live. Jill also passing her Shiva powers onto Clive made me feel like Joshua. It was at this point where I fully broke because she could have been the one character that actually got to keep her powers and use it to help Clive. But no, we had to sideline this character because Clive is going to be the one that bears the burden of everyone. It's okay, Jill, you can stay back in the hideaway while big strong Clive takes on God. What a joke. Last and certainly not Jill, Clive. The man whose biggest flaw is that he just can't stop helping people. He's just so gosh dang nice that he just gets in the way. I wish Clive had more personality, man. That's it. Originally, I thought it was gonna be Clive on a warpath for revenge and be this Guts archetype character, but then he realizes he can't beat the I killed my brother allegations, so he accepts it and then tries to repent by being everyone's errand boy. My biggest issue overall is that the whole story bends to Clive. Everything is so focused around Clive that none of the other players got to breathe and shine in their own light. I think the voice actor for Clive did a great job, but ultimately it is completely clear that this was a story about Clive and everyone else was just an extra. I really wish that this wasn't the case, and at the end, when we were fighting Ultima, I wish it was like a normal party system where the whole gang is banding together to fight a god. Might as well call this game Final Clive 16. Outside of the characters, the pacing of this story is tragic. For example, after the gang visits Cid's grave, they agree to go to the Crystalline Dominion. Here resides a mother crystal that the gang aims to destroy. However, the route to the capital requires them to go through Dhalmekia first. One gate stands between Dhalmekia and the Crystalline Dominion, and guards need to be shown a trader pass. Luckily, the group has a traveling trader, Goots. Perfect. Clive and Jill eventually arrive in Baklad and learn that Goots lost his trader pass because it was stolen by kids. Guess whose job it is to hunt the trader pass down? Mr. Good Guy Fella Clive, anything to make this world free Rossfield. I lost it. I have lost it. I was like, okay, the main story quest needs to stop playing games, because while it highlights the struggle of the Dalmekian people, I really do not want to play an MMO quest in a single player game. This whole part could have been cut out completely and the narrative would not have been any different. Only that we got to resolve the Crystalline Dominion conflict sooner. You do meet some characters that sit new in Baklad, but this could have been a side quest from the beginning, as their story is only expanded upon in a series of side quests. There were so many really big moments followed by moments of go here and do this and go here and do that in the main story quest. It is crazy to me that they had filler built into the main story, and that for me is unforgivable. Going from a crazy icon fight to building 3 parts of a ship felt frustrating. Fighting Bahamut and then going to various cities to kill Akashic made me want to spit. I left out a lot of things I wanted to rant about, but I feel like I got my point across, and I would be beating a dead horse. Overall, Final Fantasy XVI failed to deliver in a bunch of different areas for me. I felt like I was enjoying myself, not because the story was good, but because it was so bad, and it kept getting worse and worse. I do not claim to be a writer that has any knowledge of the nuances of making a good story, but you can't fool me into thinking this was Creative Business Unit 3's best and brightest work. If you watched to the end of this video, thank you. I'm not here to sway anyone's opinion on this game. I just really needed a place to vent about this game.